In the heart of Manhattan, a skyscraper touched the clouds like it owned the sky. The name etched in steel above the revolving doors read Anderson Globala, fortress of power, prestige, and cold ambition. Inside, lives were built and broken. At the speed of quarterly returns, among them was Evelyn Hart, blonde, elegant in the way one forgets to notice, always moving just outside the spotlight. She was the assistant to Chase Anderson, the billionaire CEO with a jaw carved from stone and a heart locked in a vault. To the world, he was untouchable. To Evelyn, he was unreachable. Every morning, she arrived at 6:45. Every evening, she left after dark. She managed his calendar, his calls, his crisis management with an invisible grace that made her indispensable but not unforgettable. Never that. Cameras caught glimpses of Chase in the elevators, in the boardroom, on the news. Evelyn was always a blur in the background, a ghost in pencil skirts and quiet heels. She moved through glass hallways like she wasn't really there, but Evelyn was watching. She had watched for 5 years. She watched him reject offers with a flick of his pen. She watched him charm investors with nothing but a crooked smile. She watched him date models who only lasted 2 months and fires that burned brighter than they lasted. He never saw her, and Evelyn, she buried her want in routine. Each morning, she walked past her reflection in the chrome elevators. Hair perfectly straightened, lips neutral, clothes muted. Eyes that once danced with color now wore the tired discipline of survival. In private, she painted. In secret, she danced barefoot across her rooftop to old Ella Fitzgerald records. She had once dreamed of Paris, of light, of someone who'd look at her and see her, not the label on her resume. That dream had dimmed long ago until the invitation came. It was another Monday, another silent latte, another 14-hour day. But when she opened the stack of executive memos Chase handed her without a glance, she found it, a thick ivory envelope marked with a gold seal. She was just the assistant, blonde, invisible, always. In black, he was the billionaire who ruled the city from his tower of glass. For 5 years, she scheduled his life, and he never once saw hers, until one night, one red dress, one moment that changed everything. But by the time he looked up, she was already gone. A gala of vision, a night to celebrate 10 years of Anderson Global, a formal black tie affair for staff, partners, and VIPs. The kind of night Chase never skipped, the kind of night assistants never attended. And yet, there it was, Miss Evelyn Hart +1. She froze, not from the invitation, but from the signature at the bottom. Chase A. For a moment, the world tilted. She looked up from her desk. His office was closed. The light inside was cold and distant. Had he seen her? Was it a mistake, or a test? That night, Evelyn stood in front of her mirror, peeling back years of gray. She opened an old box buried in the back of her closet, velvet-lined and wrapped in tissue. Inside, folded like a secret, was the red dress, not scarlet, not maroon, but deep, rich crimson, like the last flare of sunlight before darkness. She hadn't worn it since before this life, before this city, before she had hidden herself to survive. The dress whispered something old and dangerous in her ear. "You are still alive." In the dark window of her apartment, Evelyn caught her reflection. She didn't look like an assistant. She looked like the woman she used to be. And if he saw her now, he wouldn't forget. Not this time. The city glittered like spilled champagne beneath the skyline, a living thing pulsing with light and hunger. That night, the guests arrived like royalty. Limousines lined the grand steps of the Easton Hotel, headlights slicing through the dark as Manhattan's elite walked into a ballroom carved from crystal and gold. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed, and above it all, a string quartet played Vivaldi, like the music itself had been reborn in glass. Evelyn stepped from her cab alone. No entourage, no noise, just the sound of heels meeting marble, and the hush of 1,000 silent gasps. The red dress fit like memory. Long, backless, daring without being desperate. Her hair fell in soft waves, not the clipped bun of boardrooms and silence. Lips stained rose, shoulders bare like open secrets. She didn't need a spotlight. She was the spotlight. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Massive chandeliers spilled golden light over the marble floors. Waiters passed trays of champagne flutes like moving statues. The walls were lined with the titans of business, dripping in money, power, and whispers. At the center of it all stood Chase Anderson, sharp tuxedo, ice gray eyes, a man carved in the image of victory. He was speaking to a senator when he noticed her, and the sentence, whatever it was, never finished. His voice caught, his breath stopped. His world, built on numbers and steel, suddenly shifted on its axis. Because, standing at the edge of the room, head held high, gaze steady, was Evelyn. Not his assistant, not the woman behind the desk, but her. The woman he never knew he'd been looking for the first time in 5 years. He saw her. Evelyn didn't look away. She walked past billionaires, models, and moguls, like they were part of the architecture, like she belonged. She didn't need to chase him, didn't need to speak. Her presence said everything. A silent reclaiming of power. Of identity. Of self. Chase moved through the crowd slowly, like a man surfacing from a dream. But every step he took toward her, the more she felt herself pulling back, not out of fear, but out of clarity. She didn't come for him. She came for her. The evening moved around them in slow motion. Speeches were made, toasts raised, eyes turned. But all Chase saw was Evelyn, the way she tilted her head when the music swelled, the curve of her back as she stepped away from a dance she hadn't asked for, the quiet command of a woman who'd lived in the shadows and now stood in full light. He approached her only once. She didn't smile, but her eyes held him for a second. That was enough. Then she turned and walked toward the terrace, into the night. Outside, the wind danced through her hair. The city stretched endlessly below her, lights flickering like stars trapped in glass. Evelyn leaned on the railing, her bare arms lit by moonlight. She felt his presence behind her, but didn't acknowledge it. He stopped 3 feet away, close but not close enough to matter. He said nothing. What could he say? He'd never asked who. She was never wanted to know. And now, the mystery he'd ignored stood before him like a question he didn't deserve to ask. She stayed for 1 minute more. Then she walked past him back into the ballroom, back into her life. And Chase remained on the terrace, surrounded by everything he'd built and haunted by the one thing he'd never noticed, back inside. Evelyn didn't look back, because something in her had changed, not because of him, but because of her, because the red dress wasn't for him. It never had been. It was for the girl she used to be, and the woman she was becoming. The Monday after the gala arrived like any other. Subway brakes screeched into gray light, coffee steamed in paper cups. The skyline returned to its usual armor of stone and steel. Evelyn Hart walked into Anderson Global at precisely 6:45 a.m., same heel, same elevator. But everything was different. She didn't carry her bag like a shield anymore, didn't avoid her reflection in the elevator walls. And when she stepped onto the executive floor, her presence shifted the air. Colleagues who had never looked up before glanced her way with new eyes. Whispers followed her through the corridor, not cruel cure. Like the world was resorting itself, and she had suddenly become part of the center. But the one person who didn't speak, who didn't so much as pass her in the hall, was Chase Anderson. His office door remained shut. His calendar went untouched for the first 3 hours of the morning. The air outside his door held the weight of hesitation, and Evelyn could feel it pressing against her like a tide. He was hiding, and she wasn't surprised. In the days that followed, everything returned to order. Almost Evelyn resumed her role, with the same quiet precision. Meetings were scheduled, contracts reviewed, flights confirmed. But beneath the routine, something simmered. Her eyes lingered less on him now. His lingered far more on her. She caught him watching once, reflected in the glass of a conference room. His gaze locked not on her hands or her work, but on her arch of her neck as she answered a call. The way she tucked her hair behind one ear, and when their eyes met in the reflection, he didn't look away, but Evelyn did. Not in shame, in control. One evening she stayed late alone, except for the light spilling from Chase's office. The glass wall was a cold mirror, revealing a man no longer in command. He sat at his desk, unmoving, staring at nothing, as if something inside him had cracked in a place he didn't know existed. She could have gone in, could have closed the door, and asked what he saw that night. But she didn't need to. Instead, she placed a stack of signed documents on the table, her initials perfectly written on every corner. A note sat atop them. Approved. E.H. Short, clean, final. That night, Evelyn walked home alone. The red dress hung quietly in her closet, zipped away. But its presence was everywhere. She found herself taking longer walks through the city, pausing at gallery windows, wandering past theaters she used to love. She started painting egg oils and deep reds, fractured shadows and splashes of gold. She bought a pair of red ballet flats just because they made her smile. She was changing. Change, she realized, doesn't always require escape. Sometimes, it requires return. Meanwhile, Chase began showing up early. He asked fewer questions in meetings, and spent longer staring out his office window. His assistants plural whispered among themselves. Evelyn heard them once in the elevator. He's different since the gala. Weird, right? Think he and Evelyn? No way, she's too smart for that. And Evelyn said nothing, because they were right. She was too smart for that. But the silence between her and Chase became louder with each passing day. Not heavy, not tense, just unresolved. One Friday morning, he left something on her desk. A single envelope. Unmarked. Inside was a painting. Her painting, one she had posted anonymously at a gallery auction 3 years ago. The only one she'd ever sold. It was of a woman, standing at the edge of a rooftop, looking out at a city of stars. It had been bought for $9,000 by someone under the name C.A. She sat at her desk, the painting in her hands, the noise of the world falling away. It wasn't a confession, it wasn't an apology, it was a memory, a sign that maybe, just maybe, he had seen her once, even if he hadn't understood what he was looking at. Not then, but maybe now. And yet, Evelyn folded the envelope closed and tucked it in her drawer, not to forget, but to remember that being seen was not the same as being chosen. Autumn came fast. The city blushed gold and rust, wind curling through the towers like a quiet song. People moved faster, now heads down, scarves tight, coffee steaming. But Evelyn, she slowed down. she began arriving later, leaving earlier, not out of rebellion but because the world outside Chase Anderson's glass fortress was calling to her in a way she hadn't felt in years. There were galleries, now places that called her work art instead of hobby. Strangers who offered critiques without knowing who she was. Curators who said things like your shadows speak, and there's grief in your palette. And they were right. Her paintings had changed. There was still red but now. It bled into other things. Amber, gray, gold. Her art wasn't hiding anymore, and neither was she. In the office, Chase watched her drift further from him inch by inch, in ways she probably didn't even notice. She answered fewer personal requests. She no longer asked if he needed anything before leaving for the night. Her emails were shorter. Still perfect, still professional, but colder. Like the warmth she used to wrap around her words had disappeared. He felt at every degree of it. But Chase had no language for this kind of loss. He had built empires, not relationships. He'd conquered markets, not hearts. And now, as he stood in the silence of his penthouse at 3 a.m., surrounded by rare art and a view of a world he owned, he finally realized he didn't own her. He never had. One morning, she didn't come in. Her desk was clean. Her inbox replied with an auto-response. Out for the week. Emergency family travel. We'll follow up remotely. And something inside him twisted. He could have called, could have texted, but he DID'd in single quotes T. Instead. He opened the locked drawer in his office, the one no one knew about. Inside was a stack of things he couldn't explain. A dried flower from the first bouquet she ordered for his mother's funeral. A boarding pass from a flight she booked hand-canceled for herself. The gala invitation she had mailed back to herself, even though it was hand-delivered, and a photograph. Grainy, taken by accident, probably. Evelyn walking across the street in the rain, holding a sketchpad under her coat, laughing. He had watched her build her own life quietly, and now he was watching her leave it. Evelyn, meanwhile, was nowhere near family. She was in a cabin 3 hours north, no reception, no schedule, no voice telling her what to do. Just silence, pine trees, and her skethpad. She hadn't run. She had paused, long enough to hear herself think, long enough to ask a question she hadn't dared until now. If I left forever, would I miss him, or just the version of me that loved him? The answer came slowly, but when it did, it was clear. She didn't love the man. She had loved who she became while watching him from the shadows, and now that she no longer needed to watch, the love was gone. A week later, she returned, not to her old desk, not to the version of Evelyn that once waited quietly by glass doors, but to finish something, to close a chapter. When she walked in that Monday, the entire floor paused, and Chase stood. He didn't speak. She didn't either. She walked past him, her footsteps light and certain, entered his office, closed the door. Alone, she left a white envelope on his desk. Inside, her letter of resignation, 1 page. No bitterness, no bitter explanation, just her signature and a small red paint stroke where her name would usually be printed. She wasn't his assistant anymore. She wasn't anyone's. Chase read it 3 times. The last line stayed with him longest. Thank you for the silence that taught me how loud I could be. That night, he stood outside her apartment building for the first time, not to chase her, just to see where she had lived all those years. While he looked right through her, the window was dark. She wasn't home. And for the first time in his life, Chase Anderson realized some people don't wait for closure, some people become it. Weeks passed, the world didn't stop, and neither did Evelyn. She moved with a quiet momentum now. Not frantic or lost but centered. She taught an art workshop in Brooklyn, sold her second painting to a boutique hotel in Soho, even started signing her work with her full name again. Evelyn Noel Hart. Not an initial, not a shadow, a name that meant something, a name she had given weight to, on the curated light of a downtown gallery. Her red dress appeared again, not worn, but painted. The brushstrokes were bold, oil on canvas. The woman's back turned to the viewer, her hair shimmered like wheat under firelight. Her dress flowed off her shoulder like spilled wine. The title. The moment he looked up, it sold before the show even opened. The buyer never came forward. Far uptown, Chase sat in his office, the skyline stretching endlessly behind him, but the city felt quieter now, louder in all the wrong ways. He hadn't replaced Evelyn. Coldn, single quotes T. He told his board it was a strategic decision to restructure, that he preferred a leaner workflow. No one questioned him, no one ever did, but the reality was simpler. He couldn't stomach anyone else in her chair because her absence was more honest than anyone else's presence. He tried to forget. He immersed himself in acquisitions, brokered $3 billion deals in a single month, but even then, something lingered. Not regret, not heartbreak. Just a question. Why didn't I see her when it mattered? He started noticing things she used to do, the small systems that kept him afloat. Meetings she once rearranged without him knowing. Gifts she curated for his clients, timed perfectly. Even the way she used to leave a glass of water by his desk when he forgot to eat. All gone now. And no amount of money could recreate that kind of care, because it wasn't transactional. It was human. Late one night, He walked through his penthouse in silence. The city blinked below like a warning light. He stopped at the painting, her painting, the rooftop girl, gazing at a city, too big to love her back. He finally understood what it meant. She wasn't looking out. She was looking forward. Then came the article. It surfaced quietly in an art magazine. No one in his circle read except his mother, who still clipped things out of habit. Evelyn Hart, From Silence to Scarlet. The former executive assistant turned full-time artist tells her story of reclaiming identity, one bold stroke at a time. He read it 6 times, not for what she said, but for what she didn't know. Mention of him, no bitterness, no confession, just reflections on light, memory, and learning to be seen without needing permission, and that, somehow, cut deeper than any farewell. A week later, he went to the gallery, unannounced, alone, baseball cap, no entourage, and there it was, her latest piece, a man in a tuxedo standing at a glass window, watching a ballroom behind him fade into blur. The colors bled together, silver, gray, a small sliver of red disappearing through the crowd. The plaque, read, "The man who stayed too late." He bought it, but didn't take it home. He left it hanging, unsigned. Some truths, he realized, were meant to be witnessed, not owned. That night he wrote her a letter. It said only this: "I see you now, and it is both my greatest awakening and my deepest regret." Che never sent it. He folded it once and burned it in the fireplace, because Evelyn Hart didn't need his recognition. She never did. Spring returned to the city like a memory, too soft to be real. Tulips bloomed along Park Avenue. Street musicians drifted back into corners. Life, in its quiet way, began again. And somewhere in a sunlit Brooklyn studio, Evelyn Hart opened the windows to let the breeze in. She no longer needed quiet. She no longer feared being seen. The studio was modest, but warm. Canvases leaned against every wall. The air smelled like oil paint and coffee. The floor was speckled with the ghosts of old colors. Her phone buzzed. A gallery offer in Lisbon, a residency in Paris. She hadn't decided yet. She wasn't in a rush. Because for the first time in years, there was no one else's clock ticking above her head. She made her own time now. One afternoon, she walked through Central Park, sketchbook in hand, not to chase inspiration but to rest in it. She passed couples laughing, a child chasing pigeons, a man in a gray suit reading on a bench. For half a second, she froze. He looked like Chase, but it wasn't. And that didn't hurt. It simply didn't matter anymore. Evelyn had changed, yes, but the real truth. She had returned. To the self she'd shelved for survival. To the girl who once believed her voice was enough. The red dress still hung in her closet, not as a trophy or a weapon, but as a reminder that when she chose herself, everything changed. Far above the park, in a tower of glass, Chase stood alone in his office once again. Years of ambition wrapped around him like a cage. He had won every game but one, and the irony was, he never even knew. He was playing. He watched the park now, not for her but for the silence she left behind. He still kept the painting, not on the wall, but in a crate. In a locked room, he couldn't look at it, but he couldn't throw it away either, because that sliver of red, fading into the crowd, was the one moment in his life he wished he could go back to Jess to say, "I see you." But Evelyn didn't need to be seen anymore. She saw herself. And that, in the end, was enough in her sketchbook. The last page was filled with a rooftop skyline, just like the one she used to imagine herself escaping to. Only this time, the woman wasn't standing at the edge. She was flying above it, dress billowing, eyes open, alone. But not lonely. No name on the drawing, no date. Just a single phrase scrawled in her own hand. Not his story anymore. If this story moved you, let it live on. Share it with someone who's ever been overlooked, forgotten, or underestimated. Subscribe for more untold tales from the quiet corners of America. And remember, sometimes, the ones in the background have the loudest stories to tell. Like, comment, and stay tuned for the next American tale.